What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is a travel expert and educator, an entrepreneur deeply committed to inspiring and empowering people to live deeper, richer, and more fulfilling lives, co-founder of AFAR Media. Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Diaz. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Thrilled to be talking about this today.
I'm so excited to be here too. And one of the ways that I found my way into this whole podcasting thing, I was doing the Independent Lodging Congress IG Live interviews, and I feel like they just really got started at 30 minutes. So this longer format of podcast is just really refreshing to me. I get to go a little bit deeper, and I'm just so glad you're here.
I'm excited to be here. It's we're going to be covering a lot of things that are near and dear to my heart, and so let's do this.
Yeah. So when we started, when we approached that 30-minute mark, you were, what I saw really lighting you up, and then we had to end it to respect everyone's time, was, just this idea of bringing responsibility into travel, right? And what does that mean? And just enriching people. And so before we get into it, how do you define hospitality?
It's a great question. And I think it's a great question for the time we're in right now. Because our world has been flipped upside down and things have shifted in very dramatic ways. And I think, a 2019 definition of hospitality would be one that is extremely guest centric, where it's focused on the guest, doing everything to make the guest feel welcome, feel at home. There's tons of kind of definitions that are similar to that. In our world and the way that we're thinking about things today, hospitality for us is a two-way street. It is a concept that really embraces the idea of mutual benefit. And what the guest can also contribute to the equation. I think JFK, his famous "ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Similar, ask not what your travels can do for you, ask what your travels can do for the communities where you're traveling and the planet in which we are living. And we know there's tons of scientific research that shows us that when humans give of themselves to things that are bigger than just them, like those vibes, those good, positive vibes are infectious. They infect the person receiving, the person giving, and the people that are standing by watching. And I think that's been kind of the evolution for us in our company, is when we think about what AFAR was 10 years ago and why it was founded on this idea that travel, when done in a curious, open-minded way, where you're willing to get outside your comfort zone and stretch yourself, that kind of travel, that spirit, that mindset transforms the self. And we know that travel, at least I do, and I was taught this from a very early age and shown it, that travel is the best form of education. When we get out in the world and experience it in this kind of deeper way, it changes our lives in really dramatic ways. That's really what AFAR has been really focused on, is inspiring people to live these deeper, richer, and more fulfilling lives. I think the shift that has happened now since COVID and since everything we've seen with these equality movements going on all around the world is that there's more to it, that when you actually go out and travel the world in this way, that there is so much untapped potential to make sure that travel you can leverage those experiences to really make a deeper impact in the communities where we're traveling, making sure that the money stays in those communities, the places you're traveling are supporting those communities in important ways, and that the travel that you're doing is making the least negative impacts on the planet as possible. So it's really flipped. We've really taken the concept of travel, of hospitality, and really said, no, guys, this isn't a one-way street anymore. This really needs to be a two-way street because we see just how connected we all are in this world.
So hearing you say the two-way street and kind of flipping it on its head, and it was all for the guest, but now the guest is actually bringing something to the table. Not now. The guest has always brought something to the table. And what's jumping into my mind is this idea of that show White Lotus, where if that was the old model, doing everything for the guest and all the bad actors and all the bad stuff that comes along with that, now it's like, hey, the guest actually is bringing so much. Like, how can we tie them all together and create an impacting experience for everyone, the people providing the hospitality and the people receiving it?
Totally. I think, us in the hospitality industry, in the travel industry, where we put the guest on a pedestal, I think is actually a fear-based relationship. Like, if we mess up, like, shit'll hit the fan, and like, we can't get, everything has to be perfect. We have to do everything right. And that fear creeps in and creates this, I don't know, it creates these constructs, these limitations. And I think guests actually, when you truly get to what they're really looking for out of any given experience, I really feel like it's deeper connection to the place that they're visiting, primarily through the people that are involved in that experience. And so and especially as you get to kind of like higher level or more affluent type of travel, there's more of that fear there. And, at the end of the day, I think those guests are humans too. And arguably they've been in more of a bubble than any other folks. And so breaking them out of that bubble is actually a very refreshing, rewarding experience for the guest. So it's being able to remove the fear out of it. And it's almost like, I think of it like, my mom was in the hotel business for 25 years. So she always talked about the difference between the front of the house and the back of the house. And those are two very different houses under the same roof. And the guest is never to see the back of the house. It's only the front of the house. And I really think that can be disrupted. I think secretly guests really do want to see the back of the house. And the more that you can show them that and give them access to that, the deeper connections are made to those experiences, and it's sticky and it brings them back. And that's what gets them talking. And that's what makes them feel like humans. And that's where you get this mutual benefit.
So this has come up in a couple of conversations, one of which was with a friend named Arnie, who's like a huge culture guy. It's like corporate culture, like how do you build it? How do you do? And he said, look, if you want to know how the hotel really operates, what's happening in the back of the house, go see that, go show the guests what's going on there, bring them back, bring them on a tour. And it's also interesting because Hilton calls their back of house the heart of the house. And I do think that there's a way to like get that heart out there. And I think that would be the best advertisement for any hotel.
Yep. It's having confidence. I think, it's confidence, and it's a desire to move from what I think is still the relationship between guest and hotel or hotelier feels still like a very codependent relationship. Like the worst of each kind of can come out, and like 1 + 1 = 1 in a sense, where each party's giving up 50% of what is inside. And how do you really shift from this codependent relationship to a relationship that, like, the Stephen Coveys of the world, 7 habits of, successful habits of the world's best people. Like, how do you go from a codependent relationship to a relationship based on interdependence, where now you're allowing people to give the best of themselves and bring more to the table than they ever could, and making that 1 + 1 = the proverbial 3. It's good for the guest. It's good for the hotel. it's good for the place where that hotel is.
That's actually ties perfectly into recently I was at this independent lodging congress meeting out in Brooklyn, and one of your colleagues, Laura Redmond, was there, and she was on a panel with Ben Pundal from A Hotel Life,
Yes.
and he was asking like, what are you covering? There were a couple of different journalists like, hey, what are you covering in the future? And she said, like, at AFAR, they want to cover how travelers can be more personally responsible. So, my feeling is that traveling, okay, there's a certain level of anonymity when you're traveling, but it doesn't give you authority to be unkind or be an asshole, right? How can we all be better citizens when we're traveling?
Totally. I mean, it's a great mindset to be able to walk out your front door every morning knowing that what you're doing is not only good for you, but good for others too. And the sense of like, look, my actions reverberate. And so it is important, at least for us at AFAR, to recognize that we all have to take responsibility and ownership. And if we don't, we'll just keep getting what we got. And so that is a very important value for us at AFAR and for our audience. We talk about this a lot. AFAR is like the tagline now is travelers who care. It's built, the company's built by travelers who care, and what we're creating is for travelers who care. And they want to understand in all the different ways possible how they can express that care. And so a lot of it is around that. It starts with just asking the right questions, right? It's, where's this money that I'm spending truly going? How does this hotel treat their employees? Is their management team made up of, you can take it a lot of different ways. Is their management team a diverse group of people? How many people working at the hotel have grown up and lived in that area? What's their supply chain look like? Where are they sourcing? And so while sustainability is such a big and can be a very confusing word with many different kind of definitions, I think one of the things is to help just travelers understand what that field looks like, and knowing that you can't tackle that entire field, because if you look at like the GSTC criteria, it has like something like 147 different performance indicators. Like, you're never going to check the box on all those things as a guest or as a hotel.
Right.
What are the ones that you really care about? Be aware of those and, kind of pick your spots, and take responsibility for the work, the action, the impact that you're going to have in any given place.
So as you're talking, and from our past conversations and now this one, I'm just hearing a lot of this idea of giving, kindness, curiosity, asking the right questions. And in doing research on you, I noticed that you did Teach for America.
Yes.
Where did you teach? And as I assume that was just right out of college, how did a lot of that, what you learned and experienced there, how did that inform who you are now?
Teach for America was one of the best decisions and most formative decisions I've made in my life. I didn't realize it at the time that it was going to be such a profound 3-year experience for me. You're right. It was right out of college. After graduation, I got assigned to Phoenix, Arizona. And so I taught at a school formerly known as Rosalinda Elementary School in South Phoenix. And I taught fifth grade for 2 years and 7th and 8th grade for a year. The school was, I'd say, 98% Hispanic, 1% Black, 1% white. all low income. Out of my 36 students, 8 of them were monolingual Spanish speakers. They didn't speak anything but Spanish. I had 2 students that were only monolingual English speakers, and the rest of the students were all transitioning from English or Spanish into English. All the parents were only Spanish speakers. Um, and that really opened my eyes because I grew up in a middle class household where luckily I had education was prioritized for us. And I got to go to good schools, and that was primarily because of the zip code that I grew up in. That was I won the lottery, like a lot of us. We won the zip code lottery. And where I taught in South Phoenix, Arizona, at 12th Street and Broadway, those kids did not win the zip code lottery, and so to be able to see the education gap between have and have nots, and how much of that is just chance,
Yeah.
really had a deep impact on making sure that we give all kids the opportunity to access high quality education. And that's not the case.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up is you mentioned JFK and asked not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And it reminded me of the Peace Corps. And I know the Peace Corps is still out there, but I feel it's international. It's not kind of lifting where we stand, right? And because we're here, and Teach for America, I have some friends that have done it, and it's impacted them all profoundly. And I'm curious as far as like, how did that experience help you on your path to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the most tangible ways is it goes back to the quote that my mom and aunt really impressed upon me from an early age, is that travel is the best form of education.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw these students never had their worlds were 2 miles by 2 miles squared. That's how big their world was. It was as big as their neighborhood. And most of those kids never had a chance to leave that neighborhood. One student whose parents were a little bit more well off than the rest. So they could actually take a trip to the Grand Canyon, or they could go to the beach, which was like a 5-hour drive away. And that girl, Alexandra was her name, she was able to relate to me differently than the other kids. And so that's where it kind of clicked. And that's when we decided to launch AFAR, the first thing that we launched was a nonprofit program called Learning AFAR, which is based on this idea that travel is the best form of education. And if we can get young people out in the world at an early age, it'll completely change their lives and the lives of the people around them. All of a sudden, you go from a world that's like 2 miles by 2 miles squared to like, holy shit, like I have the whole universe in the palm of my hand, and that sense of confidence, that sense of empowerment, that realization that you're worth something, that there's others in this world that are like you or even more worse off than you. Because what we do on these trips is like, some of the groups, we sent a group to like Costa Rica, and these are kids who are like the kids at Rosalind Elementary, never had a chance to travel outside of their neighborhoods, low income, all on free or reduced lunch. And to be able to get them to go to a school in Costa Rica and paint the school and donate books and read to the kids and see how they live, like it just peels the blinders back. And then some of those kids today, I mean, our first group of kids that we sent in 2009 from a school in Oakland, 2 of those students are now teachers at that school in Oakland. Talk about,
Wow.
a life-changing experience that you can now directly tie back to what's the impact that they're making on the community that they're living in through the power of travel. And I think it just beautifully expresses how travel can be such a transformative experience, not only for the self, but for others as well.
So when you think about the impact that travel can have positively for the traveler and the giver of hospitality, or the host, if you will, and as you at AFAR are thinking about the content you're creating to those people who want to impact and be impacted, how do you guys generate your ideas, and how are you coming up with the content, and how do you maintain such, I guess, like thoughtful curation of the content that you're doing?
I love your questions. They're deep, and I think it first starts with values. What do you believe? What's your vision for the future of this world? How do you want people to treat each other? How do you want to feel? What kind of behaviors and values do you need to have to make that happen? And so, this, we think, diversity and equality, equal act, all those things are really important. So that's where it starts, is values. But then how does it really happen? And I think one of the biggest changes we are making, and are just in the very early stages of, is thinking about who are those pool of writers and photographers that we're tapping into. And if you look at the bylines, or the contributors page in earlier versions of the magazine, you're going to see a lot of the usual suspects. It's the proverbial white guy from Brooklyn who's a travel writer that we send out. And so we got a very, even though we came in with a very different approach, and I'd say people noticed that off the bat, over time, it still felt like we were only really representing one narrow slice of a perspective. And so one of the big things that we've done in this year, and this is really kudos to Julia Cosgrove, our VP editor-in-chief, and Laura Redman, our director of digital content, and their teams, is to say, hey, and this is not easy to do, is to start to create new pools of contributors with different backgrounds, and different ethnicities, and different definitions of gender. And so by doing this, like, we just hired a new executive editor we're thrilled about. We're taking a leap, but we've got confidence. She lives in Nairobi, Kenya. She's based there. So, and she doesn't really come from travel. She almost comes from like a public health background and science background. So who she has is her writers and her contributors and her, use the word Rolodex, it's like we're talking 1985, but her Rolodex are people that we have never had access to before. And that's where those changes really, where the rubber meets the road. It's doing the hard work of branching out of your bubble. And we at AFAR, especially after the summer that we had last year with all these, killings of murders of innocent Black people and people of color, is we said, Jesus, like, how do we step up? How do we do better? And so we had to really do these, and we're not there yet. We're just starting to really churn, but like making these very structural shifts in our company and putting things down on paper that resonate with the entire group. And the first step there was, let's create we're going to change our company to be a public benefit company, meaning it's not just responsible to the shareholders anymore. There's three of us, it needs to be responsible to all stakeholders.
Yeah.
And
that's an interesting shift of this idea of shareholders versus stakeholders. And tell me more about that, because I'm super intrigued by it, because in a typical corporation or company, or there's shareholders and you're doing everything to benefit the shareholders. But I love the idea that we're talking more about stakeholders, and actually you've touched upon it just in the travel experience. But I'd just love to hear about what it means to AFAR stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders?
Yeah, well, one, we do it because even though there's, reams of data that says by doing this, you're going to be a better company, more sustainable company, more profitable. All that stuff. Like, that's not really why we're doing it. I'd say why Greg and I wanted to do this from the beginning. It's because it just feels right,
Mhm.
and it's the kind of place we want to be. So and work and live and interact with. It's how we want to wake up in the morning, knowing that it's not just about us. Even though that can feel good sometimes, it's the short game. So our stakeholders are really, our employees, uh, our independent contractors, our advertisers and partners, our audience. The most important is, they play a role in this too. This isn't, once again, that's a two-way street. That's not just us telling them. It's a two-way street. And I think, you see the other side. And we're no experts in this. We're stumbling along like everybody else. I think our heart's in the right place, and we're open to feedback, and we're open to criticism, and we take a hard look at all those things and try to get it right. Even if we didn't get it right the first time, it's just an ongoing process. And, you see this out in destinations, because there are certain destinations that have just, kept on pulling those golden eggs from the goose, and they weren't taking care of the goose. And you look at places like, Reykjavik or Venice or, Monterey or the Faroe Islands. Like, you see these places, and there is a backlash to tourists and tourism. And they're saying, we don't even want a tourism board anymore. We don't want tourists. It's because the destination has not been thoughtful about making sure that their strategy is inclusive for all the people that are impacted by the operations of the industry.
So that's a really interesting point, because those tourism boards are the ones who are kind of developing strategy. And it's not just if you build it, they will come. They're actually going out and marketing and selling and enticing people to come visit. Are you guys at AFAR and your audience stakeholder, are you interfacing with any of those tourism boards? And if you are or aren't, um, what's a way that you could envision an outcome and a change in a place like that may be overwhelmed and is sick of tourists?
Yeah. So, tourism advertising, advertising is like 80% of our business, and tourism advertising is like 80% of our advertising revenue. So, tourism boards are a very important, client and partner of ours. And we interact with a lot of them because they're interested in tapping into kind of, the audience that we have, audience of the world's best travelers. You're seeing, like in any industry, you've got your leaders that come out in front, do things because they feel it's the right thing to do. And that's where they want to head, and they take that leap first. And then you've got your followers that eventually will get there, because if they don't, they'll just be out of business at some point. And so they just need to be dragged along. So we have the privilege of working with, some tourism boards that are very forward thinking on this, and that are really trying to create.
Can you give an example of one? I don't want to
Yeah,
have
sure.
you
I mean,
ignore others, but give
yeah.
me a great case study about where the future may be going.
Yeah, I mean, so in different ways. Charleston, Charleston, South Carolina, highly touristed city for lots of good reasons.
Very haunted.
Lots of, yeah, it's haunted. I think we could put them in a cage match with Savannah about who has the most haunted city, and New Orleans might be a third too. Or,
Yeah.
they all get in that match. But they also have a lot of history and a lot of dark history and a dark past. And Helen Hill and Catherine Doherty and the team at Charleston have really, they do not want to shy away from that. And they realize that is an important part of what needs to come up for all visitors. And that, the romanticized idea of plantation culture is not really what plantations were all about, in the 1800s. These were places where slaves were forced to do work that they weren't paid to do, that they were ripped away from their families, that they were beaten, killed, chased, and had fear struck into them every single day. Like, that's what those places were all about. So being able to tell a more holistic story about where you come from is really, I think, it's courageous. You don't always get it right the first time, but that's they are a tourism board that is stepping out and saying, we're not going to keep doing things like the way we did them. And we need to embrace the stories from all of the people that are from here or have been forced to be from here. And so that's one side of it, the cultural people side. You've got other destinations like Asheville, North Carolina, where they get slammed with tourism in certain parts of the year. And so what they're trying to do is create a message that shows, how do you come visit this place, not just in, the most crowded, beautiful times of the year, but like there's things to do all year round. So talking about how shoulder seasons or off seasons, and all the great reasons why going in the off season, more access to locals, more ability to tap into venues that you wouldn't have been able to get into, a different experience because, it's not slammed with tourists. So those are just like a couple of ways that tourism boards are starting to do it. You also see just kind of a third thing, and this is more explicit, is that tourism boards are actually creating like pacts or agreements that they make, or a pledge that they make the tourists sign. So like if you go,
Really?
if you land in Reykjavik, you'll see kind of like right on the wall at at baggage claim, how do you be a good citizen? How do you be a good tourist here? Here are the ways to do it. I want to say there's a small little island in the South Pacific. It might be like Vanuatu, where like the kids of that island came up with a pledge. So ground up stakeholders that manifests into kind of a visa that gets slapped right into your passport. So like right in your passport, you have your visa that is an agreement between you and the locals that was created by the kids, the students of that place.
That's
I mean,
fantastic.
freaking powerful. And so these are ways that show, how do we create more inclusive, tourism that really brings out the strengths and minimizes the negatives. And we know, like, that's the other thing, is like anything we do has a cost. I mean, everything has a cost. There's always costs. So like to say, oh, well, this flight shaming stuff, like the flight shamers are only looking at one side of the equation. They're only looking at the costs of that those flights have borne on the environment per the amount of carbon that we're spewing, carbon dioxide we're spewing into the air. They're not able to measure the benefits of that travel of each individual person. And so what we want to try to do is show the world that like there's it's a P&L. You've got your costs and you got your benefits. And what we're trying to do is make sure that the benefits, the impacts that we make in those places outweigh the costs that it takes us to get there, travel there, eat there, all that.
And it's a balance sheet too, because, obviously you want the equity and the value to grow over time.
Totally.
So
yeah.
So a question. So so you have these really great examples of the tourism boards and how they're thinking differently, right? But then if you go into the audience, so they're kind of, in a way, they're almost attracting a certain type of guest, right? Or they're turning up the volume on the type of guest that they want, a more responsible guest, a more curious guest, or
that's the self-selecting part. And then, but it is all just any person that comes, they want to be aware of, this is how you do it.
Yeah. Okay. So then back to that original, or the one of the bigger stakeholders of your audience, like tell us about your audience and how are they finding each other? Who is your audience, and how are they finding these kind of lanterns that are out there?
Yeah. So the core of our audience, I think of as, it starts with, these are travelers who care. They care about the world. They care about their neighbors. They care about leading lives that are deep, rich, and fulfilling. They're global citizens. They're global citizen travelers, curious, open-minded, want to explore. They want to get their ass off of the proverbial bus tour and sit at the kitchen table. They know that, travel can create a piece of glass between us and the place where we're trying to interact with, and they're trying they want to get around that. And these are, I think of as, and data shows us these are the world's best travelers. They spend the most on travel, and this is compared to, like, just our other media, other travel media out there. We're number one in the amount that they spend, their affluence, their ability to influence others, and their care for the planet and the places that they're going. In a sense, this is a self-selecting audience, because this is the spirit that AFAR was started with. This is the spirit that it's carried on with, and so it naturally attracts people who care about the same things. It just so happens that mindset translates to people that travel the most, people that spend the most, and people that have the least amount of impact or make the biggest amount of net benefit on a place.
And when was AFAR founded?
So we're 12 years old now. So we launched in August of 2009.
Okay. The reason why I'm asking is, when I hear about the people who want to sit at the table, oftentimes in hotels, there's not or sit at the kitchen table. There's not a kitchen table to sit at. So is there any tie-in to, like, the rise of Airbnb and short-term rentals and AFAR and the impact?
I mean, we launched around the same time. I remember having conversations with Brian Chesky when he was, in 2008, when we were sharing. Yeah, he was sharing what he was trying to do. We were sharing what we were trying to do. So, we all kind of launched around the same time. He's obviously gone on to do some pretty amazing things and really help disrupt the industry in a bigger way. So I feel like, at that time, people were wanting to get out of what maybe they felt was more of a stale, cookie cutter hotel experience. I mean, I remember talking to hoteliers in 2009 about our concept, and honestly, they would look at us like we had, four heads. Joe, what are you taught? Like, you want travelers to get outside the hotel and experience the destination? Like, no. We want them to be in the restaurants. We want to keep them in the hotel as long as possible. And you're just like, holy shit, this isn't going to go well. And now, it's 180 degrees different. They're trying to figure out how to make sure that they're giving the guests the most local experiences possible. They're not shy about getting them outside the hotel. I even had one meeting to just kind of show you how it's flipped, where, like, the GM was like, how about if we lock the doors to the hotel for several hours a day and don't let them come back in? Now he's taking an extreme position to try to flesh out what the real idea might be. But, like, that would have been, you would have been put in the insane asylum in 2009, any GM that had suggested that idea.
So going back to 2009, and you're having these conversations and getting AFAR up off the ground and building it up, and you hear those, it must have been really discouraging to hear those stories where they want to keep everyone in. At what point did you know, oh shit, we have something here?
I think when we started to see the audience start to flock to it, and we started getting some of our, like, core advertisers like nodding their head to this, and like we started getting luxury when I say non-endemic, I mean brands that are not really related to travel. When we started getting like non-travel luxury brands saying, you guys got to tell us more, like we're interested, because some of those higher end luxury brands, once again, you got the ones that are the leaders and then everyone else are the lemmings.
Mhm.
And so you had like, I remember like our first luxury advertisers were Max Mara and Parmigiani Fleurier. These are watches that are, $50 to $250,000.
Wow.
So you knew things were, when this magazine that like by two crazy guys who've never been in travel before, launching in the downturn. I mean, we started hiring people a week after Lehman Brothers collapsed. Gives you kind of a sense of when like we started launching. Like you get these like non-endemic luxury advertisers that are like, we want to be a part of this ride. They're kind of
Mhm.
like, all right, we've got something here. And we just have to continue to do the work to like really flesh it out and show that this is the way that the world's going. If you Googled experiential travel in 2009, when we launched, literally put that quote in phrase, that phrase in quotes, you would only get like 5 or 6 definitions that would pop up onto your Google search rankings, like that had the words experiential travel. And there were operators that are doing this, and it wasn't like that we invented the mindset. I think
Mm.
we framed it and we put it into a pretty package that was compelling for people. You Google that phrase today, depending on where you're Googling from, I mean, you're going to get anywhere from 300,000 to 600,000 search results around the
Jeez.
idea of experiential travel. So this thing is
So
just like,
that's amazing. And then, okay, so then going back to, okay, when you're starting and you had the idea and you're running with it, to use that GM who's like, we want to keep everyone in. The other people that were in the travel marketplace, what I normally am asking is like the worst experience of hospitality, but in this case, it's not hospitality. It's when you looked at the world of travel content that was out there, and you saw a really poor example of what it was, and you're like, we want to go this way. What drove you to be as opposite and different from whatever the existing thing was out there the most?
we were travelers that weren't being served in the way that we wanted to be served.
So it's almost like there was just nothing there. Everything was the status quo, and you're like, it's just not there. We need to blaze a new path.
In a sense, I mean, it started, I'd say like the curtains were peeled back on a trip that Greg and I had taken to India.
Mm-hmm.
And it was before we launched the magazine. It's where we actually came up with the idea. After a 6-week trip to India, we had a ticket into Delhi, a ticket out of Mumbai, nothing really planned in between. We kind of like plan as we go, stayed in amazing hotels and got to see, all the different corners of India. But the way that we traveled was really about the people. We would meet an interesting person and say, Dan, like, you're awesome. We had a great time meeting you. Like, who are some of your friends that you should introduce us to that we can go and see? We did that for 6 weeks, basically travel by referral. It was like,
Ah.
and so we would ping pong across the country and meet all these, entrepreneurs. A guy that started with a little import export business of like 200 square feet and got to spend, a day with him looking at his 250,000 square feet of space. A tour guide that hiked us up like the tallest peak in southern India, and asking him the question. This goes back to like just empowering travelers to ask the right questions, or to even ask questions. And I just asked him, like, is this your passion? Is guiding people on mountains your passion? And he's like, no. I'm like, awesome, thank you, thanks for the non-bullshit answer. I got a follow-up, like, what is your passion? He's like, I'm an artist. I love painting. So Follow-up question is, I love that. How can I see your work?
Show me, tell me, bring me.
Yes. Yeah. And so in 3 questions, we got from hiking up a mountain that he was uninspired about hiking up, got a little more like an exercise, to ending up in his parents' home in Kerala, meeting his wife, his parents. His mom went and picked like fruit off of their tree and made like juice. And we went into his bedroom that was smaller than the size of this little box that I'm in, and looked at all of the art that was hanging on the wall and hearing like his stories. Like, we paid for a guy to take us up a mountain, and we ended up with a mountain of experiences that at the end of the day are things that I'm telling you about vividly, 13 years later.
Was there any Kingfisher beer as you were looking around at his art?
The Kingfisher was on the last days. There was Kingfisher beer involved in every part of our travel, Dan. Yeah. But the Kingfishers really were that was the impetus for the starting of AFAR. Was we were sitting on a beach in Goa after like this long trip, amazing trip, but arduous trip. You can know that, India isn't always the easiest place to travel through.
Yeah.
And sitting on a beach in Goa, drinking a bunch of Kingfishers and saying, God, we just had all these amazing experiences, meeting all these incredible people. And there hasn't been a travel brand that really talks about travel this way. It's all about like, the model on the deserted beach on top of an elephant, or, the woman on the Bosphorus in a flowing green dress, like beautifully lit. Like, those are beautiful photos, I guess. But like, come on, like, when have we seen that shit? Never.
When you were sharing the story with the artist, it reminds me, I was in Cusco 20 something years ago, and my godmother from the Bay Area in California, she had a guy that worked at her print shop that was from Cusco, and his family was multi-generational in this house, like on the plaza. And he was a musician. All of his friends were musicians. And I remember just going down into their basement one night. They were all just playing. We were drinking, I forget the name of the beer, but they were giant bottles, eating guinea pig. And like, it was just one of the most memorable travel experiences ever, because we were at the kitchen table.
This show's about like defining hospitality. And I'm a big, like, show, don't tell guy. Like, you can define it, but like the stories that we're swapping right now, we are showing what that is. We're giving something of ourselves to a common purpose, and that ability to all share in that experience together is what we remember. I mean, Basher said it on your first podcast, like, some ridiculous number of hotels that he stays in New York. Like, what was it, 206 or something like that? It's like, Jesus, man, that's crazy. But he's like, I don't remember the flooring. I don't remember like the crystal. Like, I remember when someone did something for me that was like genuine. Like, that's what it's all about. And it's like, there's a million beautiful places in this world. There's thousands of like beautiful hotels that, owners spent probably too much money making them look great, but it's the ones where you've had those like meaningful connections with people that you will remember. And those are like, we think about like the stories that define hospitality. It ultimately comes back to those connections that you have with people. I like one real quick one. Like, we were in Mittenwald, Germany. Greg and I were traveling with some friends in Mittenwald. We were on a quest. We had stumbled into this woman's house on a hike during a storm, and we went into her small little kitchen. She only spoke German. There was another traveler that was there, and he was German and drunk, and they were drinking this beer that we were like, this is like the best beer in the entire world. We got to go find this beer. And it was called Mittenwalder. And so we had to go to the town of Mittenwald to go find this beer. Lo and behold, we get to this town. We go to this restaurant for lunch, and it's a husband and wife. And we become friendly with them at lunch. And, by the end of lunch, he's bringing out this like big roast that hasn't been cooked yet. And he's like, we're like, what are you doing with that? He's like, oh, I'm going to cook it for tonight. Like, that's amazing. He's like, do you guys want to stay for dinner? We were at their place, their restaurant. House was above the restaurant from 12 p.m. to like 10 p.m. We had dinner with them. We had lunch with them. We had this roast with them. Like, talk about hospitality.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that all we did was just be open to the experience, but they offered more of themselves than was expected.
They were open and welcoming, and you just said you were open. And it's just really interesting that through all these conversations that it really has to do with who's the most open, right? And then in talking to a mentor of mine, he said, look, he's open to so many people, but many people are closed off, and they're closed off because they think they're either above the situation or person or below it. And it just closes them off. And I think the more that we can be open, the better. And beer always tastes better after a hike, right?
Totally. And I think that's the word, is how do we continue to stay open? How do we, continue? Joseph Campbell says, you got to embrace it all. You got to stay open to it all, the stuff of life, the good, the bad, the ugly. And like, as humans, we have natural tendencies to close down on the things that we don't like. We run away from the things we're averse to naturally, and we chase the things that we love.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is I hope that, I mean, the fact that I think, hopefully, each successive generation continues to open a little more and awaken, and the conversations that you hear on podcasts or that you read in books or the courses that you see, like, people are talking about, things like, meditation or mindfulness in ways that were only talked about by, a handful 30 or 40 years ago. So this is becoming more mainstream, and it's going to be really important because in a time where, the world feels like it has closed in around us, literally. Sheltering in place, is the world closing in around you, not being able to see your family, not being able to go to the hospital with your wife who's about to deliver your child. Like, the world is closed around you. How can we continue to do things and live in a way that allows us to stay open to it all?
It's almost like we're about to, and I thought we were a little bit closer, but it's almost as if we haven't gotten to the place where we're entering this great reopening, this bacchanal of reopening, and just experience and being out there, and I want it to happen. I want it to happen for the world. And so actually that's a really great point, because outside of this pandemic where we're still in the midst of it and everything is going. So if you were to take that off of your shelf, as far as you, Joe, at AFAR and what you're doing, what's keeping you up at night?
Besides my 22-month-old?
Besides your 20, or maybe in addition to?
I'm nervous. I'm nervous that things are going to go back to business as usual. Mm-hmm. I feel like, we spent a lot of time diving into the concept of sustainability through the pandemic, and sustainability in the broad sense of the word, from an economic, a socioeconomic, cultural perspective as well. I don't know. I mean, you hear of all these horror stories about guests that are acting like assholes to staff. And you're seeing stories in the news where, like, what was it, in June or July, like 10%, and this has been kind of an ongoing average, is like 10% of hospitality workers are quitting every month. It's like 750,000 workers. And a lot of it is because, one, they're underpaid. Two, they're overworked. Three, they're super stressed. 4, they don't have any benefits. And 5, the people that are coming to ask them for things are being complete dicks.
Yeah, I heard a
And
shocking thing. I started a company called Blue Canary. We help coach teams to be safe. And the most shocking thing I learned on the housekeeping front is it was either 85 or 95% of all housekeepers were sexually harassed in some way or another.
it's ridiculous. I mean, it's unacceptable, and it's inexcusable, and it's egregious. And
So
you
how do you
know,
fix it?
you know, it goes back to, once again, I think, if I'm gonna one, it's educating the guests. Um, One, it's not tolerating guests that are acting like assholes and just getting them out of there as soon as that behavior starts to rear its ugly head. Um,
So just hit the road like you're out.
yeah, I mean, I think, like you saw the no shirts, no shoes, no service signs in like McDonald's in like 1985. Like, if you act like an asshole, you'll be asked to leave. Like that's really should be kind of the next no shirt, no shoes, no service sign. And I'd love to see a hotel actually put that on their front door. If you act like an asshole, you will need to leave. You'll be asked to leave. So part of it is guest education, setting expectations for zero tolerance of that kind of thing. But it also goes back to like what we've been talking about, the reset of what the definition of hospitality needs to mean, and empowering hotels, owners, empowering, their managers to make those calls, because it impacts everyone. And so I think of that as energy. You do not want that energy flowing through your doors. You don't want
Mhm.
that energy. You don't want your employees exposed to that energy. You don't want them bringing that home to their families. You don't want to have, so like guest and empowerment, and hotels and hospitality in general, tourism in general, taking a stand and saying what is acceptable and what isn't, and embracing this new concept of hospitality, which is all about the two-way street.
I love it. Um, Thinking about you and AFAR and where you're going, what's your biggest challenge and need now?
Well, I mean, we're not through this pandemic.
Mhm.
There's still a lot of destinations are, stopping and starting. Asia for leisure, business too, is still pretty closed down to, American travelers. Um, there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. I mean, to try to figure out how to plan a trip to Europe is next to near impossible because of just all the changes. So we're just living in a very like dynamic,
Mhm.
fluid environment. And if you talk to Laura Redmond, our head of digital, and Michelle Barron, who runs a lot of the editorial for us we called her the COVID queen because that's what she covered for, months, and the openings and the closings and the like. So we're having to like pivot, was one of the words of like 2020, 2021, is like, we just have to kind of pivot and make sure that we're on top, our fingers are on the pulse of the current news.
It's
Uh,
funny. There was a woman at that event. What was her name? Victoria Walker. She writes for the Points Guy, and she's when you talked about pivot, she was like, it was so funny. She was like, I'm a travel writer, but all of a sudden I woke up one day and I had to become a science writer. Like I like
yeah,
traveling, and
yeah,
it was really funny the way she put it. It was hilarious.
yeah. You know what? My heart goes out to them because that's not their beat.
Yeah, I'm not a
Um,
scientist, but they
they
figured it
learned
out
it
and they
and they
did it. Yeah.
embraced it. And I gotta say, like, that it's been very stressful on our team. All these changes, not to mention you dealing with everything else going on in your own personal life, but like
Mhm.
the fact that your world is doing this every single day, and like you're rewriting a story 10 different times. It's like,
Mhm.
Europe closed their borders again. Guess we need to go back in and re-edit that thing. That becomes tedious and stressful. So that's been, making sure that we're taking care of our team and that we're all looking out for each other. I think that's one of my biggest priorities, is that, our team feels empowered, that they feel tucked in, that they have the freedom to say, hey, when they need a break, they can take a break, and to continue to bring in more diverse voices that can be representative of all of us and show us that through diversity comes strength of opinions and strength of direction and strength of, inclusivity. Those I think are, like, for us, really the most important things. And
You said something there. You past it. You went past it really quickly, but I think I hadn't heard this before. But to feel tucked in, to feel cozy and cared for like that, that's amazing.
I mean, don't we all want to feel
But do you?
tucked in,
I've never heard that used before. Have you
Yeah.
used that before?
Yeah. I mean, I got to give our former publisher credit for this. Ellen Asmodeo, who's, a mentor to me. I love using a lot of her one-liners. And I steal them from, I tell her, I'm going to steal that one from you. And, like, she would
I'm going to
always,
steal it from you now.
yeah,
So
well,
thank you,
this
Ellen.
comes from Ellen. She always spoke about, we got to keep people tucked in. You got to make them
Mm.
tucked in. And, like, Greg and I being kind of like the hard charging, and she's a hard charger. I mean, she grew up in the Bronx. She doesn't mess around, and she sees something, she goes after it. But, like, the reason why people love her, not only because of, like, all the joy she exudes, but she really cares about making sure that people are tucked in. And, like, it was a very awesome compliment to have for us, being two, like, kind of type A, dominant male energy who didn't care about as much about celebrating. Like, it's just about, like, let's get the result, and, like, all right, we did that. What did we do wrong on that? How do we learn from it? Let's move on. And she's like, that's not going to tuck people in, Joe.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Huh.
So
Okay,
you,
so
Ellen.
yeah, thank you, Ellen. The future, what are you most excited about?
That we have a whole generation of travelers coming up that just, I think, care more, that they're more aware, that their values are more aligned in places that I think will manifest behaviors that ultimately are more beneficial for the planet and its people. So I think we're continuing to see more awakening. I'm extremely impressed by the young minds out there that are pushing the limits. And I'm extremely encouraged by the work and that they're doing and the things that they believe in. And I think that gives us hope. It gives us inspiration. And, at the end of the day, it gives us positive momentum to continue to move the ball forward and talk about travel as something that can be transformational for the self, for local communities, and for our planet. And that's ultimately travel needs to have, and tourism needs to have a bigger role at the table. I think it gets shortchanged a lot. And, like, the tourism minister is like, the eighth one down on the totem pole.
Yeah.
It's not like, the foreign minister is like, whatever, like, but, like, the minister of tourism, that's like the guy that, maybe made, like, a pretty hefty donation to the campaign donation, and now you get to be tourism minister. Congratulations.
Exactly.
And so that needs to, hopefully that's starting to change, where governments are realizing what a critical role tourism has. This flow of people and goods, and the ability, it's at the hub. It really is at a hub of everything. And so we need to, take tourism and put it on a more important pedestal when it comes to sitting at the table with decision makers at a governmental level.
I agree. Talking another conversation I had, it's like, what makes me different from today to who I'll be in 5 years? It's the books I've read and the people I've met, really. And I think that it's not just me, but for everyone. Okay, so let's pretend your current you, the Joe of today, goes back to Phoenix just before you take on your first assignment at Teach for America at, was it Rosalinda High School?
Rosalinda Elementary.
Rosalinda
Now
Elementary.
called Irene Lopez Elementary after our vice assistant principal, who was an amazing woman who passed, and they named it in honor of her, Irene
Oh,
Lopez. She was amazing.
okay, awesome.
More than you need to
Let's
know, but I had
No,
other
I
people.
love. Well, a really good friend of mine, Amika Moran, she did Teach for America in somewhere in Louisiana, and now she's a principal in East Palo Alto. It's changed her life. She's been doing it for years and years and years. So, and it impacted. I don't know if there's a scoreboard of how many people she's impacted positively, but it's incredible. But let's pretend you run into yourself before you're going into your first day teaching. Everything that you know today, what advice do you give your younger self before you step foot into that school?
Good things take a long time to happen, and um, and there is a force in the universe that Albert Einstein called the most powerful force in existence, and he said that's the power of compound interest. And compound interest is really a combination of like you dogged, incremental, consistent effort applied. And if you can be, if you can get after it, consistently every single day, that will create really amazing results. And so to understand that if you really want exponential growth, like I was taught on some of my meditation retreats, these really grueling, like 10-day Vipassana silent retreats, like you'll spend 11 hours on a cushion, and like all the teacher says is, all right, keep working, start again. Keep working, start again. Keep working, start again. And that notion, I don't think, is something that, I think the downside of this the generations coming up is like we've gotten used to the press button comforts. Like you can just click it on a phone. It's easy. Staples, just hit the red button. It's easy. No, like the good things take a long time. And, that was like advice that my mom had given me in my high school yearbook. Never existed a person who lived a life of ease whose name is worth remembering. And that's, good things take a long time to happen. And compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe. And so if you apply, this get after it consistently approach every single day, that's pretty darn good. And if I would have like really done that with like my investing when I was like 21 years old, just put it into no fee index funds that mark to the S&P, the NASDAQ, and Dow, 25 years later, you would be in a different place. So I think that's nice to reflect back on and share
Jack
that with others.
Bogle, Jack Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, is standing up in his grave right now
And Ben
and
Graham
thanking you.
and Ben Graham, and they're
And
doing a
Vanguard.
high five. They're doing a high five.
I'm always amazed that such a simple concept of compounding interest was always so mystifying to Albert Einstein. And I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and it kind of ties into the books we've read and the people we meet. I think a really a more powerful concept than that is also the idea of compounding relationships. And the more collisions that we have interacting with people in meaningful ways, I think that's the stuff that really changes the world as well.
Well,
But
that's the compounding principle. Definitely, it
yeah,
applies to numbers pretty easily, but it does. It applies to what I call soft. The things that are less tangibly defined, that are
totally.
harder to put your fingers on. It applies to those as well. And when you realize it is when you're stuck
Yeah.
and you go to make a call and you have the opportunity, you can call 20 people that'll come to your aid, or or the other side is, I'm going to call one person and cross my fingers that they're going to be willing to help me,
Yep,
And
totally.
so that's where that comes to life.
Awesome. So Joe, where can people connect with you? How do they find you?
Yeah, well, obviously, they should go to afar.com. I'd say they could, sign up for our daily newsletter called Daily Wander. That's an awesome way to just get our content coming to you every single day. It's free. We're on all the social channels, AFAR Media on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and the like. And then, I haven't spent as much time on social, but you can always hit me up. Twitter's probably where I spend like maybe most of my time, and I'm Joe Diaz Afar, at Joe Diaz Afar. And yeah, or just shoot me an email,
Awesome.
joe@afar.com.
Hey, Joe, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and your stories.
I love just chatting with you. It makes, an hour feels like, 10 minutes, and you ask some thoughtful questions that I think, gets people thinking. And that's part of, I think, why we need to be here. And I celebrate your work, and am grateful for it is you ask great questions, and great questions help people come up with come up with great answers. And that's hospitality, man. You're
Yeah.
doing it.
Oh, now you're making me blush, but thank you. And also thank you to our listeners. I hope Joe's work at AFAR and what AFAR is doing in this conversation helped evolve your ideas on what makes hospitality special. And if it did, please refer it to a friend, because we just want to keep getting the message out there. So thank you all very much.